evening of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Today, I'd like to welcome a new bobblehead to the set of Law and Batting Order. Here we have a Tim Tebow Broncos bobblehead. It was given as a gift. All I need now is a Tebow Jets bobblehead, but for now, it's Tebow time. Anyway, here are some quick hits from the past week. The NHL regular season has ended, which means that the Stanley Cup playoffs have officially begun. So far, the playoffs have been great in this first round. The New York Rangers, my hometown hockey team, put a real hurting on the Senators in Game 1 and hope to advance to the next round of the playoffs with 3 more wins. Other teams with leads in the conference quarterfinals are the LA Kings over the Canucks 1-0, Phoenix leading Chicago 1-0, and the Philadelphia Flyers clobbering the Pittsburgh Penguins, giving them a 2-0 lead. There have been a lot of Bubbas in sports history. Bubba Trammell, Bubba Franks, and even Bubba Smith. But now you can add Bubba Watson to that list. Last week on Easter Sunday, Bubba Watson escaped with the green jacket in Augusta, Georgia after winning the PGA Masters tournament. The golfing bout between Watson, Louis Oosthuizen, and Phil Mickelson proved to be one of the most exhilarating golf playoff games in recent history. Watson sealed the deal after he drove the ball out of a rough patch of woods and within a few yards of the hole, putting him at a closer advantage of winning the tournament than Oosthuizen. Watson scored par and won the Masters, making this his first major championship win in his golfing career. MLB opening weekend continues as other teams open up their seasons in front of their home crowds. In St. Louis on Friday, the Cardinals unveiled their World Series trophy for their fans, but despite winning the Fall Classic, they lost to their divisional rival, Chicago Cubs. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, the New York Yankees silenced the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim 5-0. That's right, Albert Pujols failed to make any noise in the Yanks' home opener. And yes, folks, I say this with great pride. The Mets spoiled the Phillies' home opener. And here is some better news. The Mets are sitting comfortably in second place, a half game behind the Nationals with a 6-2 record. I really don't know if this will last long, but come on, cut a Mets fan some slack, will ya? What was that you said, Mr. Met? Oh yeah, that's right. Let's go Mets! Today's Order in the Court will be discussing audio that was publicly released containing a pregame speech that former Saints defensive coordinator Gregg Williams delivered to his players prior to the Saints playoff game against the 49ers. Aside from the free agency madness and the RG3 Andrew Luck competition, this NFL offseason has been all about the New Orleans Saints Bounty Fund. As mentioned in previous episodes, Gregg Williams and other Saints players created a bounty fund that rewards players for inflicting serious intentional injuries on opposing players. The NFL suspended Gregg Williams indefinitely for his actions, while other Saints coaches were suspended. In light of these punishments, a 12-minute audio sample was released of Gregg Williams instructing his players prior to the Saints game against the 49ers in this year's playoffs to attack certain players, including running backs Kendall Hunter and Frank Gore, wide receiver Kyle Williams, and quarterback Alex Smith. His mantra throughout the audio was, "Kill the head and the body will die." You can listen to an abbreviated portion of the audio with subtitles by clicking the annotation on the right or by clicking the link below this video. Just as a warning, the video is filled with profanity, and due to its graphic nature, viewer discretion is advised. After listening to this audio, I pondered, could Gregg Williams face criminal prosecution for his involvement in the Saints Bounty Fund? After all, we have an audio, and the graphic nature of the audio would suggest potential criminal prosecution. To answer this question and more, I had the privilege of interviewing David Fish, who is an NFL player agent, is an adjunct professor at New York Law School, and has a trial and appellate practice in New York and Illinois for over 15 years. I had a chance to talk with David about possible criminal prosecution for Gregg Williams, as well as his reaction to the audio as an NFL agent, and what he thinks should be done to prevent a bounty fund of this magnitude. Take a look. Today's Order in the Court will be discussing recent audio that was released of a pregame speech that Gregg Williams delivered to Saints defensive players before the divisional playoff series game against the San Francisco 49ers. For today's episode, it is my privilege to interview David Fish, who is an adjunct professor at New York Law School, teaches legal writing there. He is an NFL player agent and has trial and appellate practice in New York and Illinois for over 15 years. David, welcome to Law and Batting Order. How are you?
Thank you. Very good. And it's good to talk to you, Anthony.
Oh, very good here, too. This Gregg Williams audio, I was horrified when I heard the whole audio. And for our viewers at home, the link to that audio will be down below in the description box. And as usual, viewer discretion is advised since there is a great deal of profanity in it. But David, from a fan's perspective, you listened to the audio. What was your initial reaction to this audio when you heard it?
I had mixed feelings about it because I have been in football locker rooms, really at the high school and college level, and surprisingly or unsurprisingly to people, a portion of what was on that audio tape was nothing particularly new. Now, there are some exceptions certainly in there, but that type of sort of aggressive, macho, sort of violent talk, I think goes on right now and will continue to go on. The stuff that did sort of raise an eyebrow, and I'm sure it's what you're focusing on, is some of the particular specific directions that it seems like he was giving his players to, specifically touch and hit their running back Frank Gore's head repeatedly. There was a lot of particular mention about affecting his head, and obviously in light of all this concussion awareness and the concussion lawsuits, that was a little bit disturbing. And there was very specific directions about attacking people's bodies. They were talking about Kyle Williams' ACL. That type of specific direction to attack somebody's body, a specific part of their body, that was rather surprising, and I have never heard anything like that before.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point that you bring up, because that was really the part of the audio that raised a red flag for me. I mean, it's common that you'll see sort of a coach inspiring their players to, go out there and hit as hard as you can, but the one part of that audio that really just shocked me entirely was the part where he's telling his players to kill the head and the body will die. And that's a direct quote from the audio. And as you alluded to, he's mentioning his players to attack specific parts of Frank Gore's body. Same with Alex Smith. And as you also alluded to, Kyle Williams. So you've had experience with criminal law, and you've had your practice for over 15 years now. From a criminal law perspective, when you listen to that audio and little bits and pieces of it, is there any part of that language that clearly spells out intent?
Well, that's probably the trickiest question because there's so many sort of factors that go into it, not just the strict reading of, in this case, the Louisiana Code. And just for full disclosure, the criminal work that I do has been in New York and New Jersey. But, being somewhat familiar with the Louisiana Code, somebody that sort of participates in the planning or the execution of a crime can be just as liable as the person that commits it. So if we're focusing on Gregg Williams, if he is directing somebody to commit a criminal assault, he could be liable. Now, the degree of the crime may be greater or lesser. But the really complicated issue here is this actually an assault in the context that we're talking about? Obviously, this is a sport of violence, and extreme contact with a great deal of force is part of the game. And there's an expectation that people are going to be hit in all parts of their body. Where does that, conduct within the game go outside of the game and actually create criminal liability? And there's not a lot of precedent. I know there was the issue in hockey a couple of years ago. There was a very disturbing hit to the back of the head, and you probably remember the name and the team better than I do. And there have been miscellaneous instances in the past where there have been some talk about bringing criminal charges, but I think beyond the fact of whether there's actual evidence in the game of conduct that was sort of outside of the expected conduct and the conduct that the players consent to there was also the precedent of what kind of line is now going to be drawn. What level of contact, what level of conduct in the game becomes criminal, and sort of the chilling effect it could have on sports in general. And I'm not one to ever say that that's the way a prosecutor should look at something and look at a chilling effect or look at the bigger picture. I mean, every case deserves its own attention, and a prosecutor really is charged with deciding whether particular conduct fits within the statute. But that's a really tough thing to, I think, to ask a district attorney, a prosecutor to do, is to try to assign criminal liability to this conduct. And, sort of the first thing I said as well, we have the tape and we know what he was directing his players to do. Now you got to sort of, I think, look at the game film. I mean, did somebody actually carry that out? Did somebody hit the side of Kyle Williams' knee in a way that appeared he was trying to do more than simply tackle him? I think the ironic thing is, if I remember that game well, I think the Niners really put a hurting on the Saints in that game. But
yeah, and that's pretty true.
But putting that aside, I mean, there are just so many facets to it. Like, I just said, actually looking at the film, seeing if there was actually conduct of that nature, and then deciding whether you want to take that really big step, which would have a tremendous impact on sports and, the most popular league in the world. I guess putting soccer aside in other countries is, the NFL.
Right, yeah. So you just mentioned earlier about this line drawing between criminal liability and, whether or not it should enter the scope of football. And I had mentioned this in a previous interview that I had with Scott Andreessen, who's another sports attorney based in Chicago. And I want to bring up the same question with you. So when the whole bounty fund came out, the story about it, there was an article that was released by Greg Doyle of CBS Sports, and he had spoken to a judge, and the judge kept himself anonymous, and he talked about possible criminal prosecution. Scott says he would be surprised if maybe there was criminal prosecution for Gregg Williams. Now, you were mentioning assault, so I actually did some research myself, but I took it a step further, and I actually checked to see in Louisiana statute if maybe battery could apply, and I actually did pull up a statute that I'd like to read off for our viewers too, and for you. It's found under Louisiana annotated statutes, section 34.1, which reads about, it's the following about second-degree battery. It reads under subsection A the following. Second-degree battery is a battery when the offender intentionally inflicts serious bodily injury. Subsection B says, serious bodily injury means bodily injury which involves unconsciousness, extreme physical pain, or protracted and obvious disfigurement, or protracted loss or impairment of the function of a bodily member, organ, or mental faculty, or a substantial risk of death. And the statute goes on to say that if you are found guilty of second-degree battery, a $2,000 fine, up to 5 years of imprisonment, or both could be the punishment. So you had mentioned you have to look at the film to see maybe if what Gregg Williams was saying in the audio was necessarily carried out in the game. But let's assume that you see the film and the specific instructions that Gregg Williams gave his players was indeed carried out. Would you expect criminal prosecution in that sense for Gregg Williams?
I still think it would be extremely unlikely. I do. And again, we're talking about an unusual form. We're not talking about just the normal public domain. We're in a forum where, like it or not, inflicting, let's say, at least discomfort, if not pain, on your opponent really is part of the game. I mean, as much as, fans may not want to look at that side of the game, when you're making a tackle, the idea is you're doing it with force and you're making your opponent, less likely to want to come right at you on the next play. And that, again, like it or not, that is an acceptable form of violence in the sport. And I think you keep getting to that same question of where is the line. I mean, you taught to tackle, by putting your shoulder between the person's numbers and driving them into the ground. That's a violent act,
Right.
And we're not going to start labeling that as criminal assault. So, if the hit is a little bit higher or lower, does that make it a criminal assault? If it's at the person's lower body, is that a criminal assault? I think it gets extremely tricky. Obviously, the league has taken really, I think, drastic steps in the last few years to limit certain types of hits, particularly on the quarterback, somebody that's sort of standing very often unprotected. Shots to the head obviously have been dealt with very seriously by the league, penalty-wise and fine-wise. But I really think that it would have to be something so incredibly extreme to warrant criminal prosecution. And it just came to my mind when I was talking with you now. Albert Hainsworth, I remember a few years ago when he was with the Texans, when he was with Tennessee.
Right.
I may be wrong. Well, Tennessee, I think he stomped on a player's head when their helmet was actually off. Now, that's the kind of conduct that, to me, might rise to that level, because that is not part of the game.
Sure.
In fact, I think it was after the whistle was blown, and then you have an intentional, violent, very serious violent act. I mean, I'm surprised that there wasn't a greater injury there. Someone stomping on somebody's head.
Right. Yeah.
That, I could understand criminal sanctions. But within the game, I think it is a tremendously difficult thing to start to carve out certain conduct that's criminal.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. That's very true. I completely forgot actually about that Albert Hainsworth incident. So this bounty fund with the Saints came out actually about a month after this whole concussion litigation commenced between the NFL and 300 former players, and one of those plaintiffs named in that suit was actually former Bears QB Jim McMahon. So when you hear the news of this Saints bounty fund, in your mind, what do you think this means for future concussion litigation in the future?
Now, I preface this by saying I'm not involved in any of those concussion lawsuits, and I'm not extremely familiar with all the standards in establishing a claim like that. But if you apply sort of the general principles of law, I think where it comes into play is the level of knowledge that the NFL had about these bounty funds. If they knew, should have known, just showed reckless disregard, whether or not it was going on at all, that certainly can help establish a plaintiff's claim, that the NFL should be held liable. I think, the NFL's defense will likely be in large part that they didn't know this was going on. That's a tough argument. I mean, this stuff has, not only, I think, is it fairly well known that this type of stuff has been going on, but there have been some specific instances. In 1989, there was that whole Eagle-Dallas situation where I think the punter who left Philly and went to Dallas, there was talk about Coach Buddy Ryan having a bounty out on the kicker. I even think there might have been some telephone call or some recorded evidence of that.
Right.
It was sort of out in the open to some degree. So that kind of stuff, I think, certainly supports a concussion litigation suit where the NFL is aware of a practice that is contributing to very serious short and long-term injuries and doesn't take serious steps to stop it. Now, obviously now, the new commissioner has been very strong on this issue. And I think that will help, but the fact that this has gone on maybe unchecked for many, many years is going to be the problem.
Yeah. So now let's take a step back and let's look at this in the eyes of NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. So if you were Roger Goodell, one, would you ban Gregg Williams from ever coaching in the NFL again? And two, what would you do as commissioner to make sure that something of this magnitude never, ever happens again?
Well, I think those questions are actually probably closely related. I am really one on a personal level to not give lifetime bans on most things. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but and sort of the idea of never giving somebody a second chance. So I guess on a personal level, it sort of cuts against what I would like to see, somebody getting a lifetime ban. However, if I'm the commissioner of the league now and I take emotion out of it and I look at it from the perspective of promoting the league, protecting against litigation, and correcting, fixing a damaged image, I would. I don't think I would ever reinstate him. I mean, how does it help the NFL to reinstate Gregg Williams? How does it hurt the NFL to reinstate him? And I see a lot of reasons why it would hurt the NFL to bring him back after this tape, and possibly other evidence that may come out. I don't see the damage to the league. The damage is to Gregg Williams, and I do have some sympathy for him and his family, as much as I don't like a lot of the things he said on the tape. But it was his conduct. It was his choice to do that, and I think it is a better business decision for Commissioner Goodell to not reinstate him. And really, to answer your second question, I mean, what should the NFL do? Well, take serious steps, and it has. Coach Sean Payton, who, I'm not exactly sure on the exact evidence of his knowledge there, but certainly wasn't the actor here, and there's no evidence that he, affirmatively supported this bounty or the statements of Gregg Williams. He's missing an entire year of his career. That's a very serious sanction, and obviously the GM and assistant coaches also receive sanctions. What the NFL should do is just what it's doing. I mean, take this very seriously and really impose unprecedented penalty.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you're an NFL player agent in real life, so you deal with players one-on-one, and you're, I'm sure, involved in their contract deals with teams. You're involved in the scouting of the players. Basically, yeah. You're 100% devoted to the player. So when you hear about a bounty fund of this magnitude, like what happened with the Saints, does that raise a red flag for you as an agent? Does that raise concern that maybe now when you negotiate a contract with a team, you're going to have to include some sort of clause about maybe intentional injury of this magnitude? What position does this put you in as an NFL player agent when a bounty fund like this comes out in the open?
Well, I mean, it affects me on numerous levels, but just on a personal level, because I've been fortunate to have clients that I care a great deal about and I get to know very well. And the idea of somebody taking an extra step outside of the normal violence and risks of a game to hurt them is extremely disturbing. My clients, I kind of feel as their family members. So right. It's the feeling if somebody sort of assaulted a family member.
Sure.
And I actually have a very specific sort of I've sort of been touched by this very specifically. I represent a player. He was a rookie last year. He's just an incredibly terrific, hard-working guy. He was an under-the-radar type player who worked so hard that teams expressed interest in him. And the New England Patriots brought him into camp. I mean, he loved it there. He loved the coaching staff. He was invigorated. It was just a great experience where he really was having an opportunity to make a name for himself. His first preseason game, and I believe it was the first or second play he was on the field, he was late hit, clearly after the whistle, in the, I would say, side to back of his head.
Oh, my God.
So it was an illegal helmet-to-helmet hit anyway. It was after the whistle, so he had sort of stopped running, and it fractured a vertebrae in his neck.
Oh, my God.
And he was obviously, he had neck surgery, and he lost that season. Unfortunately, I could say he is in great shape now. He is fully recovered. And I think he's going to have an opportunity to have a great career. But, there's so many things there. I mean, one, that is a sort of almost a life-threatening, potentially kind of hit. I mean, when you're dealing with somebody's neck, that kind of impacted the vertebrae in the spine. So there's that aspect of it. Once we were sort of sure he was sort of able to recover, this is an opportunity. I mean, as a young man, you lose an entire year of your career in a sport where the careers aren't long anyway. It was just a tremendously disturbing thing. And, yeah, I had a lot of anger. I mean, I'm not going to call out the person that did it, although it's something people could probably easily look up.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was pissed off, and it's just so disturbing because it's such a violent sport where their injuries are just part of the sport, and when something is done sort of outside of the scope of just a normal violence, it's very upsetting.
Yeah.
So what can I do? There's not a lot. I mean, I think the league, and I'm happy that it is, the league sort of has to take it upon itself to make the rules clear and to enforce them strictly. And I think the league apparently has done that. I mean, in fact, it's been accused very often of going too far and being too protective of players. And I know there's also criticism about who they actually seek to protect. The Tom Brady's, Peyton Manning's, Drew Brees' types of players are the ones that maybe get the extra protection. It's been argued. But, I mean, even enforcement of these rules to protect players' heads and unnecessary damage to their limbs is great, and I hope it continues. That's a tough thing.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, and this will be my last question, you had mentioned that the NFL is a very physical sport. Injuries are going to be common. That's the risk that players assume when they enter that, enter the field and they, get in uniform and play the game. But just as a result of the Saints Bounty Fund, and when you look at the whole situation from, I guess, a whole big perspective, from a big from just looking at it, the whole situation from beginning to end, do you think that this Saints Bounty Fund may have harmed the integrity of the National Football League, or do you think that it's pretty much untarnished, that the NFL is going to be still the most popular game in I guess the whole country, really?
I think it's going to continue to be the most popular game in the country. I really do. I mean, the NFL Shield, it's very hard to penetrate. I mean, it is such a popular sport, and it has, there have been other types of scandals and bad press, and NFL lockout. There have been so many things over the years that if you look at them isolated, you would say, wow, that's going to have a real terrible effect on the league. And it just doesn't. I mean, the NFL is so popular, everything about it, even in its off season. I mean, we're as off season as we could be right now. And, the NFL draft is going to become probably the most popular sport itself when, in a couple of weeks. So it's so popular. I really do not think this will have any impact on its popularity, on its success. Nonetheless, I think it's obviously a very important issue. It goes to player safety and health, and it should be addressed very seriously the way it is.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this will be an interesting story. I mean, this has been, I guess, the offseason has been solely devoted on the Saints, but we'll see what else develops from that situation. But, David, I really appreciate the time. Thank you for being on Law and Batting Order.
My pleasure. It's been really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there you have it. 17 episodes. You can say that Season 1 has officially come to a close. It's now time to get busy with finals and relax a bit after school ends. But don't worry, folks. I have a lot planned for the next season of Law and Batting Order, so be sure to mark June 4th as the launch date for a new season of Law and Batting Order. In the meantime, be sure to check out previous episodes by clicking above and spread the word to those who share the same passion as I do for sports law. And most importantly, I'd like to thank each and every one of you out there who has made these past 4 months one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life. I am truly appreciative of your support and loyalty, and I can never thank you enough. Anyway, that's a show. Leave all your comments down below, and be sure to visit Law and Batting Order at lawandbattingorder.com, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. See you June 4th, guys. To this audio, I pondered, could Gregg Williams face criminal prosecution for his involvement in the Saints Bounty Fund? After all, we have an audio, and the graphic nature of the audio would suggest potential criminal prosecution. To answer this question and more, I had the privilege of interviewing David Fish, who is an NFL player agent is an adjunct professor at New York Law School and has a trial and appellate practice in New York and Illinois for over 15 years. I had a chance to talk with David about possible criminal prosecution for Gregg Williams, as well as his reaction to the audio as an NFL agent and what he thinks should be done to prevent a bounty fund of this magnitude. Take a look. Today's Order in the Court will be discussing recent audio that was released of a pregame speech that Gregg Williams delivered to Saints defensive players before the divisional playoff series game against the San Francisco 49ers. For today's episode, it is my privilege to interview David Fish, who is an adjunct episode 17 of Law and Batting Order. I'm your host, Tony Iliakostas. Today, I'd like to welcome a new bobblehead to the set of Law and Batting Order. Here we have a Tim Tebow Broncos bobblehead. It was given as a gift. All I need now is a Tebow Jets bobblehead, but for now, it's Tebow time. Anyway, here are some quick hits from the past week. The NHL regular season has ended, which means that the Stanley Cup playoffs have officially begun. So far, the playoffs have been great in this first round. The New York Rangers, my hometown hockey team, put a real hurting on the Senators in Game 1 and hope to advance to the next round of the playoffs with 3 more wins. Other teams with leads in the conference quarterfinals. St. Louis on Friday, the Cardinals unveiled their World Series trophy for their fans, but despite winning the Fall Classic, they lost to their divisional rival, Chicago Cubs. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, the New York Yankees silenced the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim 5-0. That's right, Albert Pujols failed to make any noise in the Yanks home opener. And yes, folks, I say this with great pride. The Mets spoiled the Phillies home opener. And here is some better news. The Mets are sitting comfortably in second place, a half game behind the Nationals with a 6-2 record. I really don't know if this will last long, but come on, cut a Mets fan some slack, will ya? What was that you said, Mr. Met? Oh yeah, that's right. Let's go Mets! Today's Order in the Court will be discussing audio that was publicly released containing a pregame speech that former Saints defensive coordinator Gregg Williams delivered to his players prior to the Saints playoff game against the 49ers. Aside from the free agency madness and the RG3 Andrew Luck competition, this NFL offseason has been all about the New Orleans Saints bounty fund. As mentioned in previous episodes, Gregg Williams and other Saints players created a bounty fund that rewards players for inflicting serious intentional injuries on opposing players. The NFL suspended Gregg Williams indefinitely for his actions, while other Saints coaches were suspended. In light of these punishments, a 12-minute audio sample was released of Gregg Williams instructing his players prior to the Saints game against the 49ers in this year's playoffs to attack certain players, including running backs Kendall Hunter and Frank Gore, wide receiver Kyle Williams, and quarterback Alex Smith. His mantra throughout the audio was, "Kill the head and the body will die." You can listen to an abbreviated portion of the audio with subtitles by clicking the annotation on the right or by clicking the link below this video. Just as a warning, the video is filled with profanity, and due to its graphic nature, viewer discretion is advised. After listening to are the LA Kings over the Canucks 1-0, Phoenix leading Chicago 1-0, and the Philadelphia Flyers clobbering the Pittsburgh Penguins, giving them a 2-0 lead. There have been a lot of Bubbas in sports history. Bubba Trammell, Bubba Franks, and even Bubba Smith. But now you can add Bubba Watson to that list. Last week on Easter Sunday, Bubba Watson escaped with the green jacket in Augusta, Georgia after winning the PGA Masters tournament. The golfing bout between Watson, Louis Oosthuizen, and Phil Mickelson proved to be one of the most exhilarating golf playoff games in recent history. Watson sealed the deal after he drove the ball out of a rough patch of woods and within a few yards of the hole, putting him at a closer advantage of winning the tournament than Oosthuizen. Watson scored par and won the Masters, making this his first major championship win in his golfing career. MLB opening weekend continues as other teams open up their seasons in front of their home crowds. In